Spot Check, the video update series for The Greatest Unreality, a dissertation about Dungeons & Dragons. I'm Nick Miser. So I've been plugging forward on transcription. I actually just finished a transcription with Josh and Lisa, a couple of New Yorkers who I met, and they had a wide variety of gaming experiences that have been gaming for a long time. I'm not going to talk too much about their interview here, but I will mention that for those of you who don't follow me on other social media, I've actually been posting excerpts from all of my interviews that I've been transcribing as I go. So to give you just a brief example of that, here's a clip of Josh talking about how he approaches GMing.
Okay, as a GM, I'm focusing on playing cool.
Playing cool?
Yes.
Okay.
I've got a lot of balls in the air, and I want to keep bouncing them into each other until something interesting falls out. And at some point, I'll have a structure, and I'll know more what's going on. But there's going to be some period where mostly what I want to do is make sure the PC is interactive.
So when I'm transcribing, I post about 3 or so of those a day. I try not to make it too excessive, but if you're interested in the project, it's a fun way to follow along, and I like getting feedback and being able to share those as I go and work through the transcriptions. But today's topic is the open campaign. Now, as I've mentioned in the past, we can divide gaming into 3 main frames of reference: the character frame, the player frame, and the social frame. We sometimes think of the third of those, the social frame, as being kinda related to the player frame, meaning that it sort of plays on the rules of the game, but only tangentially related to the character frame, meaning that we don't often think about how our social interactions in the social frame influence our experience of the in-game reality. But they're actually all very interconnected. The open campaign is an example of that, and it will become clear what I mean by open campaign as I go. I'll actually mostly be talking about my own experiences in gaming here, a little bit about fieldwork, but primarily looking at my own campaign. So that campaign is about 3 years old, and I'm running it using Adventurer Conqueror King. It's a homebrew setting, meaning I made up the world mostly on my own by stealing lots of ideas from all over the place, but it's also based largely around Stonehell Dungeon, which is a mega dungeon created by Mike Curtis. Now, in the past, I had what I consider the standard model for campaigns of both playing and running on the social level, meaning that we had a group of 3 to 5, maybe 6 if we were a larger group of people who met regularly to play together. And so if we only had 3 of the people showing up on a given week, then we'd call it or do something else or just hang out. What I decided to do with this campaign, though, was that I decided to run Cities of Ishtamesh in every place that I was running D&D, no matter who was there or who wasn't there. And so in my home group, I have a core group of people that mostly play with me, maybe 3 to 5 or so, as you would have in a standard group. But we play with a wide circle of people, even locally, and I would estimate that maybe 30 to 50 people have dropped in or out of the campaign at one time. And our adventures are very modular, meaning that they don't necessarily carry over from one session to the other. We try and wrap things up enough so that if someone who's there this week isn't there next week, we can still move forward. And so as I said, we've had a wide number of people play in this world, and I keep track of things that they do and they make changes to the world. Now, what effect does this social decision of what we do when people aren't there and how many people can play and not play with us, what effect does that have on our experience of the fictive world? Well, it's actually had a lot of changes on how we experience the fictive world. Now, to think about the ways that affects our experience of the fictive world, I want to think carefully about how we experience the real world for a second. So I want to start by thinking about our experience of the Grand Canyon. If you've been to the Grand Canyon, you have this one trip that you've taken there, and it's real to you in a certain way, and you can call it to mind and in your experience. But I would argue that it's not real in the same degree, or maybe just in the same way, as your bedroom is real to you. You saw the Grand Canyon maybe at one time with a certain group of people, and if they're not around, then you can't even recall certain parts of that because you share the memories with them. Now, if you compare that to your experience of your bedroom, you've experienced your bedroom numerous times, different times of day, different lighting conditions. You've walked all around it. You've been in different kinds of moods when you've been there, and maybe, depending on your life, maybe different people have been in the bedroom, or maybe you're the only one who's been in there. But you've experienced it in lots of different ways, and so it takes on this level of reality, or a different kind of reality. If you try and conjure those two places, assuming that you've been to both your bedroom and the Grand Canyon, or just someplace that you've you've only been one time, you experience those very differently in your imagination as you bring it to mind just now. So the principle here is that the greater number of angles of entry something has into your experience, the richer its reality in your experience. Or there's a philosopher, Kohak, who says that seeing many things does not expand the imagination, but only stocks factual recall. Imagination grows far more with seeing the same thing in many perspectives and contexts. And so with this open campaign idea, by having lots of different people coming into that world, we're seeing the same thing in many perspectives and contexts. I've run it at conventions, I've run it online, I've run it at home, I've run it camping, I've run it with this group of people and that group of people. And all of those different angles of entry into the imaginary world shape it and give us, those of us that play in that world, a greater level of interaction with it, and it creates a greater richness of interaction with that world. Now, on practical terms, what that means is that if my players in a given session encounter something in the world, they're never sure if it's something that I made up, something that Mike Curtis made up in Stonehell Dungeon, or whether it's something that is a result of some player's action somewhere else that I happen to have run the campaign. And that makes them approach these things with a greater level of realness than if they knew that it was something that I had done or they had done. Because just like in the real world, we encounter these things and we don't know exactly why something is the way that it is without a little bit of investigation. On the flip side of that, when people are playing in this open campaign, they know that they can make a lasting impact on the world that other people might see when they're not around. And so there's this greater sense of reality there also. Now, as an example of that, in Mike Curtis's Stonehell, over the arched entrance to this mega dungeon is a poem. It says, "Beware all who enter these benighted halls of stone. Within lies no solace nor any comforts of home. Toiling for our crimes we must dig where we dwell, with no freedom or mercy in our vast stony hell." Now, and someone, I don't remember who, a player who played with us online, knowing that this was a sustained world that lots of other people might see, took a piece of chalk and wrote underneath there, C-, a little sentimental. And so since then, whenever someone comes into my version of Stonehell that happens in our campaign, it says C-, a little sentimental under the door. A minor thing, but it gives a good degree of reality to the world. One last thing I've learned from having an open campaign is that different sets of experiences provide opportunities for narrativization. So if a player in a campaign has experienced or been in a session where a certain non-player character was a major part, and that non-player character comes back, then they have an opportunity to narrativize and explain some things about that non-player character. And someone else at the table might have yet another set of experiences with that non-player character, and so they're providing their own narratives, and there's a sort of triangulation in on the experience that provides all of these bits of little micro-narrative that are built up and enrich the current session that we're in. So different experiences, different angles, making that in-game reality seem more and more real. And I think that that's part of what we're doing when we play games, is to make imaginary things real. So those are my thoughts on the open campaign. Let me know what you think of that. If you have any questions or comments, if you've experimented with similar things, go ahead and follow on Facebook or Twitter if you want to keep up with transcriptions as I go. And until then, I will see you next time.
That's why when we say you pay, you got